Egland. We are live on Newsday TV with a Newsday investigation. We found Long Island doctors kept their state licenses even after convictions, arrests, and judgments. And the lack of discipline after misconduct put patients in danger. And joining me to talk about it all is Newsday reporter David Olson. He's been behind all of this. This has been 2 years in the making, this huge investigation. So talk to me about what kind of sparked this idea and what you found during your investigation.
Well, my colleague Ariel Martinez and I worked on this story for about 2 years, and we wanted to look into physician discipline. We each had the idea separately. We both thought, hey, how is New York disciplining doctors who have misconduct? And we reached out to an organization called TruthMD, which gave us this huge database of doctors. Ariel was able to identify 46 doctors through those records and also through some court records who had gone months or years practicing after there was some type of finding against them. And in some cases, in more than half the cases, those doctors have never been disciplined. And one of the big findings is that over a number of years, the number of doctors being disciplined has been declining, even though the number of doctors in the state has been rising significantly, as have the number of complaints against doctors. Kind of
some staggering statistics that you guys found. You traveled to Florida. You traveled a few different places to speak with some of these people who say they were victims of a few of these doctors. Talk to me about what your experience was like, speaking with these Long Islanders and former Long Islanders, and how this has affected their lives.
It was very emotional, especially the victims and survivors of sexual abuse, because something that happened many, many years ago but still affects them to this day. For example, I talked to several victims and survivors of Stuart Copperman, who's a pediatrician. He was a pediatrician in Merrick, and it's interesting, one of the women I talked with, Gina Salgado, then known as Gina Limmer, she actually complained to the state back in 1985, and in 1987 they ruled 2-1 against her and another girl, saying, and allowed Dr. Copperman to keep his license. What's interesting also is that board, the committee that voted to allow him to keep his license, was 2 doctors voted yes to keep the license, and a minister, a non-doctor, voted no. And that sort of gets into one of the big criticisms that folks we've talked to had, that the board for professional medical conduct is too heavily weighed toward the interests of doctors. That was a common criticism we found. And Gina said that 2-1 finding is an example of that. And actually, Dr. Copperman's license was eventually revoked because more girls came forward. And in year 2000, his license was revoked. But Gina said, hey, how many girls may not have been abused if they would have listened to me?
Well, that's one of the stories we covered during this investigation, something that David has been looking into, along with other stories. So let's take a look at Dr. Copperman's story and his victims at this issue that's really affecting several Long Islanders. Take a look at this.
I trusted that what he was doing was the right thing. I didn't know.
I grabbed his hand and I said, what are you doing? And I stopped him.
Our society trusts doctors. We just do.
That trust in tatters for Beth Maffey and Gina Salgado, former Long Islanders who grew up seeing Dr. Stuart Copperman, a former Merrick pediatrician. They say he repeatedly abused them as young girls.
His head was resting on my inner thigh, and I could tell you right now, I could still feel that feeling of his hair on my thigh.
Gina says Dr. Copperman would tell her mother to leave the room and do a pelvic exam, saying she had a fungus that needed to be cleaned.
It's almost like he devised this plan, like this thing that he knew that any young girl would be too mortified to ever talk about to their friends or their parent.
Gina eventually did tell her parents, and after they filed a complaint, she went before the state's medical disciplinary board. Her story, along with another young woman's accusing Copperman, were very similar, despite never speaking to each other. And yet the panel, made up of 2 doctors and 1 non-physician, dismissed the case.
The thing that upset me so much was knowing that he was going to continue doing this to girls.
First it's 4 women, then it's another 7 or 8 women, And then all of a sudden, it's over 100 women.
In 2000, following several complaints, Dr. Copperman's license was revoked.
It took how many more years after I went to court? Like 10 more years. How many girls he could have done this to in 10 years.
Dr. Copperman was found civilly liable for abusing over 100 patients, but Kristen Fedden, who represents the victims, says there could be thousands more.
There could have been a chaperone in place. There are certain alternative options that they potentially could have employed to either catch him, stop him, or prevent the furtherance of abuse, and they didn't. They really failed these young girls.
The court awarded $1.6 billion to the victims, though their lawyer says they'll only see a tiny fraction of that money, if any at all. Dr. Copperman has refused to comment, but in the past has denied the allegations to Newsday. He was never charged, despite the abuse being reported to police. His story is one of several. Our team of investigative reporters analyzed thousands of pages of documents and data, finding 46 Long Island doctors continued to practice despite allegations against them, including things like botched surgeries and child porn charges. If doctors are accused of some sort of misconduct, their case is brought before the New York State Board for Professional Medical Conduct. About 2/3 of its members are physicians.
It was like a fraternity, and they were all going to stick together, and they weren't going to listen.
The chairman of the Board for Professional Medical Conduct, Dr. Thomas T. Lee, tells Newsday, quote, "Each case is considered and deliberated methodically in accordance with the laws." Our analysis has found a drastic drop in disciplinary action against doctors in recent years, even as the number of physicians has gone up. Cases that resulted in discipline were down 35% from an average of 168 cases from 2011 to 2013, compared to 110 cases a decade later. Chairman Lee acknowledged it increasingly relies on warnings rather than formal discipline.
The governmental processes in place didn't protect these children.
And not much has changed. Data shows in 2023, there were 30 times as many complaints to the board as there were final actions. And most legislative efforts to crack down on the issue have failed. Victims say something needs to be done to rebuild the trust they've lost in those who took an oath to help and heal.
She's at the same stage of life that I was at when that man took what he did from me. And I don't want the same thing happening to her.
So we see how this has affected those women's lives. David spoke to both of those women and many others. During this investigation, was there anything, David, that kind of stood out to you or surprised you?
I think one of the things that maybe surprised me is we also looked at the budgets of the Office of Professional Medical Conduct, and it actually has declined over the last 10 years, and over the last 20 years it's been essentially flat. And that's even though the number of doctors has increased by about 50%, and the number of complaints have increased by a similar amount. And so critics say they just don't have the money or the resource, the money or the personnel to be able to investigate these cases well. I just wasn't expecting the budget to actually be falling, especially when you take into account inflation over the last 20 years.
So what has been the response to this report? I mean, how are they kind of justifying these actions, if you will?
So the state told me that they are actually trying to take a more administrative warning approach rather than focusing more on more serious discipline. And they say that actually benefits the public, saying that gets doctors into compliance, basically, this warning process. They also say that you don't want to throw the book at a doctor during a doctor shortage if that doctor can be rehabilitated. And one example I found that I have a story coming up tomorrow is a doctor who was arrested on drug charges, his license was suspended, and now works as medical director for a drug and alcohol treatment center. And he said, hey, they gave me a second chance. And you can argue at least that the state the state could argue, I guess, in that case, that it made the right decision because he's using his knowledge, his experience in a way to help others.
So this is something the investigative team really dug into. Again, a 2-year-long investigation. We've just highlighted one of the cases here, but there are several others. You can see our full documentary on this and read more of David's stories and Ariel's stories on our website, newsday.com. Just click Get More below the Newsday TV video box. Thanks for watching, and thank you, David, as well.
Thank you.